Welcome to Resilience Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Ostrolenk. This show is about building better humans, institutions, and systems. On the show, I'll be interviewing many different experts from across many different fields, including human optimization, health and fitness, team building, mind-body medicine. In the institutional space, we're looking at different institutions and how we can create new ones, new models and maps, including in medicine, in education, in intelligence community, in law enforcement, in the military, especially in the special operations community. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Lee Baucom to the podcast. Lee is a relationship coach, author, speaker, and founder of Save the Marriage, where for more than 2 decades, he has helped individuals and couples navigate one of life's most painful experiences, the possibility of losing a marriage. Through his coaching, books, courses, and highly regarded Save the Marriage podcast, he's reached hundreds of thousands of people around the world with practical, compassionate guidance for rebuilding connection, restoring hope, and creating healthier relationships. What I appreciate about Lee's work is that he doesn't simply focus on communication techniques or conflict resolution. He challenges people to become the kind of partner who changes the dynamic of the relationship, often beginning with the only person we can truly have the power to change, ourselves. Today, we're going to explore what actually saves relationships, the mistakes people make when trying to reconnect, how couples can recover from crisis, what it takes to build a marriage that not only survives, but truly thrives. Dr. Lee, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
So, obviously I want to kind of do a deep dive. We have a chat offline about your paradigm, your philosophy, and you've been doing this for an awful long time, but why don't you walk us through what led you to eventually become a therapist and a coach and focusing on relationships, especially the way you do?
It's always interesting when you ask somebody who has some psychology training, like, how did you get here? Because there's lots of pieces. I'll go, oh, well, it's probably has something to do with this too. But I'll go forward and then I'm going to jump back a little bit. So I was in college and I thought I was going to go into business. Eventually, business is what came around for me, but I thought I was going to be a business major. And when I got there, I went, that's not it. I want to be helping people. And one of the things that I realized is that I was always the confidant for people. They came to me to share the stories. And so while I wasn't the most popular guy, I was probably the most secret holding person around. Right? And so that meant grad school. So after college, I went to grad school for actually a couple of masters and a PhD. And we did a lot of training. Originally, it was individual therapy, and I was mostly interested in the whole systems dynamic of families, and that included couples. And so I switched my focus to marriage and family therapy, and then as that went on, got more and more focused with working with couples. So that was the training world. But all along the time, I was going, what's wrong with this scene? Why am I not getting the results that I would like to get with couples? And of course, when you're in graduate school and you've got a supervisor looking over your shoulder, you're the problem. That what are you doing wrong? And so I started talking with my colleagues and they were getting the same results. And I started pinning down my supervisors and so were they. And it turns out that we were pretty much doing what regular therapists do as result wise. So when I started diving into the research, I realized that marriage therapy, and I want to be specific, marriage therapy, not individual therapy. Marriage therapy doesn't have a great track record with effectiveness, meaning whether it helped the relationship or not, right? That was my criteria. And so I started asking what would make a difference. As I was finishing my dissertation, I was reading an article about coaching, and this was before there was a coach on every corner. This is 1994, 1995 probably. So my wife, who had been through all of this with me, said, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I guess I'm going to go get some training as a coach. And there was one training program, 3-year training program in coaching. And so I took that and basically integrated that into my practice and began to be more of a coach than therapist in my outlook and approach. And we can talk more about that too.
I would love that. So let me just ask you a question about that. So, retrospectively, what did you learn differently about being a therapist versus being a coach? And you say you integrated it. So we're like,
Yeah.
what did you jettison?
part of a broader model that you created for yourself?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of things that I'd already identified pretty quickly. I was always one of those, what's the theory problem that we have? My whole graduate school days were spent probably needling the field, individual therapy and marriage therapy. And that was kind of me going, so where are our short points? What's wrong with our models? And so, as I started looking at marriage therapy, it occurred to me that there are some very consistent model problems, theory problems, how it's carried out, training problems, and then client problems. And so that is part of what I saw as the limits. So let me just kind of dive a little bit into those.
And I love that, but I have to wonder if like you must have been really popular in graduate school. If your questions are like, why is this like what are the limits to these?
I was absolutely not.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, so, we had some, tense moments, especially when it was all of us together, and the thing that actually saved me was a, professor who was probably the elder professor who had a strong reaction to a paper I wrote that was critiquing, the therapy model overall. And that was we were in his basement in the seminar, and I was critiquing it and getting a lot of pushback from my classmates who were all training to be in the same little therapy world as I was. And this professor, who had been a therapist, was having a strong reaction too. And I left going, I still think I'm right. But, I burned some bridges there. And that day, news spread. People had seen my paper, and the whole group. We had a colloquium meeting, and at that meeting, the professor said, "I need to address something." And he really did this nice thing where he acted like he was coming after me, and I was going, "Oh my gosh!" in front of everybody. And then he stopped and he said, "So now I need to say something directly to you." And he said, "Lee, you were right. Everything you wrote in that is right. We need to pay attention to this." And that changed kind of the process. It allowed me to be a bit rebellious, but that also meant that when it was time to write my dissertation, my supervisor said, "Okay, you've been kicking all this time. What do you think instead of what do you not think? What are you opposed to? What do you think?" And so that helped me as I stepped out to think more critically about how do I want to do practice and what do I want to do, which was basically how can I be effective? Like, what is the most effective route? And that's always been my thing. Can we figure out the effective route? So that brings us kind of back to my critique, right? There are a couple. And one central one is I watched a lot of people who were trained as individual therapists hang their shingle as a couples therapist. And there is a substantial difference in how you view what's coming in your office. As you know from MFT training, that is a very different viewpoint than an individual therapist. And so there are a lot of therapists who, frankly, don't have the training slash perspective of marriage therapy who are doing marriage therapy. And I put that in air quotes. So that's a problem. And then we have a problem of where everything boils down to in therapy. A lot of times people would, as you pointed out in your kind of intro, they make it into a communication conflict problem. And I know why. I mean, there's some skills that you can hand to somebody, but that's not the underlying issue. It's treating a symptom, and I always felt like that was like whack a mole. The problem of the week, and they come in the next time, and the problem of the week, and they come in the next time, problem of the week, which brings up the other thing is that therapy tends to be backward looking and often gives an explanation for why, which instead of being a transformational moment begins to be an explanation of why I'm the way I am and I'm stuck this way. And that's a repeating theme I see, whether it's individual or couples work. My wife's a therapist too, and so she got tired of me saying, jokingly, but not so jokingly, that people come to therapy for one of two reasons, either to change or to not change. And the not change is you get a story that explains why you're the way you are from your past that you can say, see, that's why I'm this way, and lock in.
Do you see more of the latter as more information is available online? Like, this is my attachment pattern.
Yeah.
Things like that.
So it just means it's more widespread. The fact that those explanatory stories have been in therapy from the very beginning, now we just have more of it. And so I get questions all the time about, well, what if that's my attachment style? And so I have to talk about what actually attachment theory was about and how we are misusing it. But yes, that is very true that every theory that's out there can be used to explain and keep you stuck if you choose that. So that's another piece of what I saw as the process is what we were defaulting to was the whack-a-mole of the symptom of the week, the fight of the week. I remember in training, I would hear a couple come into the waiting area laughing and being loving with each other. And so where do you start? So how'd the week go? And how'd the week go sent them on a spiral downward, and they would leave frustrated, upset, maybe a little more awareness of what had happened, but no real change. And that to me was where I could just see that path isn't getting us anywhere. So we had that problem. But there is another piece that I watched over and over, which is that if one person didn't want to be there as much as the other, which is often true, they would often talk themselves into more of that rather than coming around to it. And the psychology has given us the term psychological reactance, which is our tendency to, even if we think it might be better for us, push against things that when we feel like they're being put upon us. So I would watch people come in and maybe they were like, I don't know what's going to happen with this, convince themselves there's nothing that could happen with this. And almost in the process of resisting, make it worse. And you can't do marriage therapy with one person. You needed them both there. And I kept going, I'm here because somebody wants me to convince their spouse to work on things. And that's not a magic skill that any therapist has. So then they become more reactant and more resistant.
Do you find that is it sex or gender? I guess sometimes confused. Gender specific, meaning like I find, and I've been doing this for 30 years myself, and it seems like more women are open to and interested in doing the work inside the relationship. And not that they're always their husbands are fighting along the way, but there seems to be less inclination to do the introspection and self-awareness and self-expression and all the stuff that, builds the relationship, the nervous system regulation. Do you find that correct me, is it a gender difference or a sexual difference amongst men and women, or is just sample size just so small that I just see the bias that I'm seeing?
So I've seen both. It come in both ways. I think there are some differences on how that presents. I've often seen where the man's going, we don't even connect anymore. I don't know what that's about. And sometimes their complaints about what that connection looks like is different than what the wife would be complaining about. And that either one can have either the we're okay, we'll get through this, it's no big deal, or the I'm just caught up in these other things. So where they got caught up, job, kids, volunteering, whatever it is, might be a little different depending on that. But I think it is very common for there to be one person going, "We've got a problem, let's deal with it," and the other going, either, "Well, we had a problem, but I'm past it. I'm out the door," or I think this is just a stage. We'll be fine. And so that resistance to seeing that there's a problem to be worked on is it cuts across gender. It just is embedded.
Do you see, you've been doing this for a while as well, you see differences from like 20 years ago to 15 years ago to now, just in terms of what's the dynamic inside the relationship generationally, or
So that is the interesting thing about this. I think that the bigger issue is much more generational. The roles are still embedded in an older generation that are loosened up in younger generations of what it means in gender and who you follow and who gets to take the lead and all those things. Has some variation based more on age, I think, than gender issues these days. So the interesting thing to me is that still often has us dealing with what I think it misses the fundamental problem. And so the therapy was, for me, I was having a hard time getting to that fundamental problem because I was stuck with these pieces. And so there's a fundamental problem, and then there's a fundamental fault that I think is true with people who are married. And the fundamental fault is that most people don't know what they're doing in a marriage. We don't get much training. And so I call it on the job training with no supervision, right? You're just out there making mistakes and trying to figure it out together. And that's a tough place to be. So when do people start looking for help, resources, books, courses, whatever? It's usually when they are in trouble, not when they are like, maybe we ought to work on things and make it stronger. That's not true across the board, but it's often true. So that's a kind of a fault we have in our culture. The fundamental problem, though, is that couples become disconnected. And that's what floats all of those symptoms along. And so I think that for me, that is the core struggle I see that starts creating all of the problems we see along the way. That lack of connection along the way that is a change from where they fell in love.
All right, so we can talk about some of the expressions of lack of connection as the surface level symptoms that people seem to deal with. But can you unpack what you mean by that and how you see it expresses?
Yeah, so I call it the pause button marriage.
Yeah.
And so the pause button marriage happens when, so let's go back. A couple, they find this person, they're attracted to them, they're interested, and so they start trying to build a connection with them. And, in the process of falling in love, they're getting that back. That we've got another problem if you're you're trying to connect with someone who's like, no, thank you. So let's assume that you found this person, you fall in love, you're building this connection, lots of habits of connection. You put a lot of energy into it, a lot of intention into it. You build up this connection enough to go, hey, let's do this for life. And one of the interesting things in my career is having had a chance to speak with a lot of couples who were engaged to talk with them about like, what do they think's going on? And so I did a lot of premarital work. I had 7 different places of faith that if you were getting married there, you were in my office 3 times.
That's great.
So I heard the same story over and over. And so on the sly, my job in that situation was to pick a fight with them. And the reason is because they thought that they had it all kind of nailed down, right? They had everything done. They were just ready to get married. And I needed to help them see that they maybe didn't have everything nailed down. And that meant to pick a fight. So I would ask around tense areas until I would find one that would unravel a little bit and we could have a real discussion, right? And so one of the things I often asked was, okay, if I walk down the street, you're in New York, you walk down the street in New York and say to anyone, pull them up, hey, what are the chances of a marriage surviving? They're going to probably give you the 50-50 thing. It's not completely, I mean, it's a little inaccurate, but it's close enough. I mean, we're a little better than that, but let's call it 50-50, coin toss. So I would say to the couple, okay, you know that fact, right? And here you are about to go through the ceremony that you're saying, I do for life. Why do you think you have already beat the odds? Because if you didn't think you had that, you would not do that. And almost to the couple, they would say, because we have actually the real love. And the built-in assumption is those who divorce didn't have real love. That's wrong. They did. They just didn't know what to do to keep it going. So let's fast forward a little bit. Couple gets married. They go into life doing that on-the-job training with no supervision, making their mistakes, building their habits. And one of the things they do is they somewhere subconsciously, consciously go, okay, we've got this nailed down. In fact, I have heard that exact expression. I thought we had it nailed down. We've got this relationship nailed down. So now we can go do parenting, career, hobbies, interests, friends, all these things that had been either waiting for them to get married or put off to the side a little bit while they were courting. And so those things come back in, and they are real things. I mean, it does take energy to parent, to build a career, to all these other things. But they hit the pause button on the marriage going, we'll get back to us, instead of let's just take some of the energy from that and put it over here. That's a harder thing to manage. It's let's put this in suspended animation. And I mean, I've watched enough science fiction to know that doesn't work in the movies either, but it certainly doesn't work in a relationship. So they hit the pause button, and the pause button is about disconnection. So all those habits of connection that they built are now building into habits of disconnection. And that shows up in pain for people. When I feel like somebody doesn't want anything to do with me, I'm going to feel that as rejection. And that triggers in my brain the same place that happens when I hit my finger with a hammer. So that pain piece is there. And what happens when we're in pain? We're looking for what's causing the pain. And it's easy to go, you're causing the pain. And so then we go from not just disconnection, but to blame, like you're doing this, and missing the fact that we are also a part of that process. So the pause button creates the scenario of disconnection, and the disconnection then rolls out in all of these other issues. So communication, that's one I often hear. People will come in and say, you just need to give us some communication skills. I'm like, why? To make you better at fighting? I mean, that's what is going to happen, because you're communicating disconnection. Communication, and they would sit there and talk to me for 20, 25 minutes. And I go, I understood every word you said. You've understood every word you said. There's not a communication problem here. There's what you are communicating that is the problem. And so that is disconnection. That's what we have to deal with.
Give me some examples of so if someone's listening to this goes, oh my God, I am doing some of those.
These days, this is a big one. Right. I always refer to this as somebody else's agenda, whether it's an email or a message or an app that wants my attention. This is somebody else's agenda. And so that pulls my attention to that. So that would be one thing. I often see couples who tell me that they are now sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both in a device with maybe the TV on, but they are no longer attending to each other. One's trying to share something important and the other's going, and looking at something else. So attention is a big piece. Where's your attention? If it's no longer aimed at each other, then you're disconnected. So probably an easy way of kind of thinking through it, there are 3 levels or layers of connection. There's physical and emotional and spiritual connection. So physical, loving touch, just loving touch, not just touch, but loving touch. Emotional connection is really that sense of feeling like you get each other and that you're supporting each other. And that happens verbally and non-verbally. When we had young kids and they would do something, my wife and I could just go, and we knew we were on this together, right? We're a team here. This is crazy. And so that's nonverbal, but we could also talk about it. We could talk about what's going on inside of us with something we're encountering. That's emotional connection. Spiritual connection is one that a lot of people just miss completely. And yet it's where couples fall in love. It's that conversation where you talk about what's most important to you. What do you dream about? What you hope for? A lot of couples would tell me these conversations that would start at 9, 10, 11 at night and go till 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning. And they would always say, and that's when I knew I loved them, because there had been a new layer of vulnerability that had been exposed. Like you're sharing your inmost part. And that exposure is what you do when you feel safe. So that spiritual connection is sharing that deep part. And a lot of times people will have that conversation a few times, and then they stop having it, as if what's important to us, our values, our goals, our hopes, our dreams, our fears are static for the rest of our lives. And so then, when people talk about they have irreconcilable differences, I'm thinking, well, what really happens is you stop tracking each other. The differences are felt when you suddenly go, wait, I didn't know you thought that. I didn't know you thought that or believed that or felt that or whatever. And suddenly you so checked out that you feel like you're at opposite places. It's kind of chaos theory in play for a relationship. And so that helps people kind of think through. So how are we? Let's compare back when we were feeling in love. Are we still feeling that physical connection? Are we still feeling that emotional connection? Are we still feeling that spiritual connection? How are we? And so those three layers give you a diagnostic tool. They also give you a treatment tool though, because they're also the path back to connection.
Let me ask you to unpack the physical connection thing, because some people might listen to this and go, "Oh, he's talking about sex."
Mm-hmm.
And I know, obviously, sexual intimacy is a piece of it, but that's not what you're necessarily just referring to. Could you share more about what you mean by physical contact? Love.
Yeah. So first, let me just say that these three layers of connection are how we connect with anyone. So think about that in broader terms. It's not, we may do it more deeply with our spouse. I mean, that's the plan, that's the hope. We might not share a whole lot about what's really important to us, but we pick and choose how we share that, right? Those three areas. So let's go with my puppy dog, who's always beside me when I'm working. How she understands affection is purely physical. She jumps up and she wants to be up against me and wants to have a scratch, right? That is physical connection. So let's translate that to humans. When I pass my wife and I pat her on the back, or she's sitting beside me and I pat her leg, or she holds my hand, or we're just close in proximity, a hug. We were going over some stuff earlier today, and not conflict, just chatting about something. And so I'm like, man, that's kind of frustrating. And so I got up and I was doing something else. She came over and she just hugged me. And it wasn't that it was not that we were against each other or anything else. It was not a, you know, conciliatory thing. It was just a support thing. And here's what happens in those few seconds of a hug. Your body goes into a connection phase, right? That's a biochemical thing that we share with other creatures. That's how we do that. So, no, it's any loving touch. And one of the things I've noticed is when couples equate to that, I'm like, how much are you non-sexually touching? I mean, what is that layer? If that's your automatic assumption, that tells me something about what's built in there, right? So when couples tell me that they are ships passing in the night, they barely brush up against each other, they're saying something about the level of physical connection. And so you're right. That is, whenever I say it, people are like, "Oh, you mean sex?" And I'm like, I mean, yes, but no, there's so much more to that. Same with spiritual connection. When I bring that up, people are like, "Oh, you mean religion?" I'm like, I mean, yes, in the sense that our religious beliefs carry something of our values, but there's so much more to that. Those are pieces we kind of jump to as a shortcut.
Yeah. And I love the fact that when you talk about the spiritual side too, you talked about dreams and fears. It's not just aspirational things. It's also like this, like, you want to have children? Yeah. And I'm scared. And here's why I'm afraid of whatever the thing might be. And grist for the mill for really deep, important conversations, as opposed to keeping it in and it comes out sideways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love the fact you brought all that into the spiritual conversation.
So I'm pretty big on looking at fear. I mean, one of my big things is how do you thrive in life? And fear is one of the places that people make a mistake. So I've talked about it as being an importance indicator, and people often use it as an avoidance indicator. So it's an importance indicator, telling me if I have some fear over something, it's important. If you were getting ready to have kids and you had no fear about what that would mean, you're delusional. Right? That doesn't mean that you should be thinking, how is this going to go? What's this going to mean to our relationship? Are we going to be good parents? All of those things are ways of us going, this is important enough for me to pay attention. And so that's the importance indicator. And that's true everywhere in life. Fear is telling me to pay attention. When I'm out running on a trail and I see something squiggly, it doesn't mean I never go on that trail again. It means I need to pay attention to that. It's important and information there. And so that's true everywhere. And when people use it as an avoidance indicator, like I need to stay away from that, then it doesn't mean the fear goes away. It just grows. It gets stronger, and then it comes out in weird ways.
Yeah, I like to say, like, kind of unexpressed things can come out one of two ways: sideways of passive aggressive behavior, or even chronic health conditions if they're not dealt with. So
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, fear just grows. I mean, that if you avoid fear, it only gives it more strength. If you feed fear, like if you're like, oh, I got to be aware of that. I got to stay away from that. You're feeding fear, and fear acts like it's your friend, but it's actually keeping you away. If you're going, yep, I got that. And the antidote to that is action. I mean, that's what fights any fear. How do I move forward with this? Yeah, I get that, and I still choose to move forward. Is how we deal with fear in relationships or in life.
Well, that's kind of the Native American story, really important. And this is kind of like the almost from what I'm hearing you say, more of a secondary thing around communication, because communicate like yes, people can communicate in such ways that's not really helpful for connection. I get that. So like just learning new communication skills aren't necessarily the thing, right? But even how do you help people both recognize their personal fears, but express them in such a way that they can healthily express them so they can be heard? So I could imagine, not only would I might be afraid of expressing a fear, that kind of thing, but it's not going to be well received. It's not going to be heard the way either I intended, or maybe it is heard the way I intended, but doesn't lead to the outcome that I was hoping for.
Hmm.
Being seen and heard in a very deeply emotional way. Like, how do you work through that with a couple?
So there's several pieces of that. Let me see if I can put in a couple. One is I also encourage people to look at what they can control and what they cannot as individuals, right? And so I can't control how my spouse receives something. I can control how I deliver it. So I can be careful about that and I can think through that, but I can't determine that. That's on them. And to be aware of that means that I then no longer have to be caught up into that. If I can't control it, then I need to let that go and be willing to let them do it with it what they need to. We only there are three things we can control, and that is what we aspire to, what attitude we have, and what actions we take. So three A's: aspiration, attitude, action. And by attitude, I don't mean to have a positive attitude. I mean, you have an attitude of facing towards, I'll figure this out, or facing towards, I'll walk away. That's a choice of attitude, and somewhere in between. And sometimes either one is correct. I don't. It's not that I'm saying you always have to be willing to figure it out. I was talking with a person. It's been a while now, and I'm like, it's time to let that business go. He'd been working this business, going further and further in debt, trying to make it work, and nothing was working. And he trying to figure it out, trying to figure it out. And I was like, it's time to let that go. That's a let it go. There are a lot of times though when we want to let it go, but we know it's important enough that we choose to figure it out, and that's a choice of what we can control. And then our actions, what we do, what we say, what we don't do, what we don't say. Those are all within our control. Everything else is outside of our control. So what my spouse does and says, what my spouse feels, what my spouse reacts, how they do that, I don't have control over that. I might need to be willing to restate what I meant by that, right? That's still in my control. But I am not ultimately in charge of how they act and how they react. So that's a big piece, just to let go of that. That this is more about expectations, like what expectations do we have? And I always think that expectations are a way that we are trying to contain our fear. And so being aware of what expectations are we dragging into this is important. So those are a couple of pieces as an individual, I try to help somebody understand that as an individual and then help them see how they do that as a couple.
And it's interesting because you and I talked a little bit offline about the me to the we. And I loved because some of the things I just heard you say is like part of the thing is the me thing. Like, how do I think and articulate my feelings, my tone, and my volume? Because I know they'll have an effect on the other person. I can't. But also the three A's is that's on me. I can't control someone else. So like the individual plays an important role, obviously inside the coupledom. But talk to him now. Let's transition. Okay, cool. We understand the role the individual plays, the three A's. Talks about the me to the we space. Like, and I know you have a great critique of our field, so maybe we can start there. That could be the vehicle into this conversation. This part of the
Yeah. So, and we did some of that when we were critiquing like the therapist and the training and those pieces. But yeah, I think that, so first we do live in a very individualized society, Western society. It's less so Eastern. In fact, I've worked with some people who's like, we have the opposite problem. We're trying to figure out how to define ourselves as individuals out of the collective. And here we're trying to figure out how to join and not feel like we're losing our individuality. So I was writing something earlier on how many times I hear somebody say, that it's that autonomy question, like, how do I have my autonomy in a relationship? And I'm like, that is a false dichotomy. You don't lose yourself in this. So here's my little analogy. With whoever, however many percentage of the population, am playing pickleball these days. And so when I go play pickleball, I play doubles. And one of the reasons, not surprising given what I do, is watching the dynamics on the team. Like, I'm very aware of my dynamic with my teammate. And I'm not one of those that I just walk on and we're like, you play your game, I'll play my game. I'm like, we're playing a game together. Like, that's our goal, is to win. And so how do we do that as a team? So as soon as I walk on, we're doing the warm up and I'm watching going, how do they play? What do they reach to? What mobility stuff, all of those things. I'm taking all of that in and going, how do I now help them play their best game? And I'm going to play my best game, and I'm hoping they'll play their best game. I don't have control over that. I've watched some people just refuse to, but I'm going to play my best game regardless of what they do. And I'm hoping that we can work as a team. So I am going to be my best player to us be a team. That's the piece, right? And so that autonomy piece, I mean, when you marry somebody, you are agreeing that our futures are connected. And what happens, what I do, does affect us now. And being aware of that means that I can't ever have my entire autonomy, and that's okay. I've chosen that. So how do we work together so that both of us are moving forward? And that there's a lot of negotiation that goes into that. There's a lot of conversations that go into that. There's even some conflict that goes. So one of the things I've often said, people will come in, I don't know about you, but I've never had someone come in and say, gosh darn it, I love conflict. That's something I really enjoy. I don't get that. I mean, even attorneys that I know, it's like they put on an act in court and they come in and like, I don't want any conflict with my spouse. I'm like, your whole job is conflict, but not in real life, that not for when they pull back. And so conflict for me should always be in service of the relationship. You can't count on two people ever agreeing 100% of the time, all the time.
That'd be boring.
Well, it would probably be someone faking it. I mean, the boredom is because somebody's not being honest. I did some consulting with closely held and family businesses, and I had a partnership, and they're like, we never agree, or we always agree. We never disagree. We always agree. And I'm like, one of you doesn't need to be here. So one of you can go do something else because one of you can take care of this. But if you want to bring the best to a relationship, two perspectives are much stronger than one perspective. So how do you discuss the perspectives and see what works for both? And that's going to be a point of conflict because we see things differently. And so that whole idea of facing with is a much better way of framing that. When we have this conflict, can we face it together and figure out what resolves that for the best of the relationship? And so there's that opportunity to have two people showing up to be their best to create that strongest we that you can.
I love that. So I want to personalize this because you had mentioned that your wife's a therapist too. And I'm really curious, as you went through therapy school, you said you had 2 masters and a PhD. Break that down for me for 1 second so I sense what your masters were.
So I did an MDiv in pastoral counseling. Then I did a THM in pastoral counseling and a PhD.
Okay, got it. Perfect. And then you got trained as a coach as well. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn about for 2 questions. What did you learn about yourself going through this whole process, both the MDiv, the therapy, and then the coaching program, but also like as a married couple and your wife's a therapist too. That's interesting. Like, how did all this, and then your expanding paradigm and how you work with people, how did that express and play out in if you don't mind me asking, in your marriage? So what'd you learn about yourself and how did all this stuff affect how you guys do your marriage?
So clearly, we all come out of situations of backgrounds, and so I spent a lot of time looking at my own family background and my own family of origin. So in family therapy, we often look back multiple generations to see what are the different patterns that filtered down, and I could sure identify some patterns that have filtered down and where I fit, what role I played, and how I take that role into the marriage. So I have some awareness of that. One of the rules that my wife and I follow is we don't psychologize each other. That I watch plenty of couples who try to therapize each other without the therapist present, and that's always a danger because the therapist is truly a third perspective, and so you can't do it together. That's so we don't. We do have lots of conversations together and talk about our perspectives, and one of the things that we do have in common is that we both tend to be pretty calm people. We're both introverts, so we often have thought before we speak, and that's just an awareness that we both have. That sometimes I need to say, I mean, is that your? Are you there? Have you gotten to your final answer? Because otherwise, an introvert can look stubborn. Like we pronounce and like I've thought this through, and so we know those dynamics between us, and we know kind of what our families were like growing up, and so there is a familiarity with how over the years of how we do things, and that's just by watching. Doesn't take therapy training for a couple to realize how the patterns are between them. One of the things I've often said is that one person can change a relationship, and I often get thrown back at me. Well, it takes two to tango, and my response is, you are already tangoing. That happened long ago. You started as tango, and the question is, do you like the steps between you? And do you understand how those steps go? Because there are patterns that get established. And if you can step back a little bit and go, oh, what is the pattern? How do I play into this? How do you play in this? I can change my pattern. I can change my steps. And if I change my steps, it will change the system. There's no way around it. Now, you can't always predict how it will change the system. That's why, sometimes no matter what you do, you can't change the outcome because you're only your part, but it still will change the system. If you recognize that you've been reacting to a pattern and you start responding differently, you change what there is for that pattern.
It's like chaos theory. Flock down in Brazil and weather changes in Southern Africa.
And so so the difference is that that's even harder to track because if someone killed the butterfly, how does that play out? But in a relationship, there's less chaos theory and more pattern repeats. Okay. And to ask the question, how can I modify my part of the pattern? It's almost immediate. It's not around the world. It's immediate in front of me. If I change my reaction and get to response. So one of my favorite words is responsibility, the ability to respond, right? Response ability, so I can respond differently. That's in my control. Then I change how that plays out in the dance. I've changed the steps.
Let me ask you about and I love the ability to respond versus react. From my experience, it takes training for someone to cultivate the capacity to learn about their own reactive states and then learn to manage them and get moments of moments between the stimulus and response to your choice. You can try something differently. How do you help an individual within a couple, if you believe this to be true, develop those capacities to create that space so they can be responsive, not reactive?
So let me see if I can break it down a little bit. When I am helping people figure out what they're going to do to try to save their relationship, I talk about 3 C's of connect, change, and create. Connect with their spouse, change themselves, meaning how are they going to grow and expand so they're maybe less fear-based and more value-based. Create, though, is how do you create that sense of being a we? Okay, so connect, change, create. But there's a prelude to that, and that is to regulate. So I use the analogy from my scuba training. You put a regulator on the air tank, right? It's high pressure air tank, high pressure. And you've got to get it to the place where you can breathe that. So you don't go from high pressure to no pressure. You go from high pressure to a sustainable pressure. so that I'm able to breathe, whether I'm at the surface, well, just below the surface or ocean floor, right? It's giving me that same thing. I'm breathing the same, and that's regulation. So one of the trainings I had in one of my programs was the regulators, and we had 5 different regulators people could use to self-regulate in the moment. So those are the regulators. And so teaching that is helpful for people. It starts with an awareness that they are dysregulated. I've got a colleague that when the couple comes into his office, he puts a pulsometer on their finger
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome.
and it triggers an alarm when it crosses 100.
Oh my God.
100 beats per minute. He's like, wait, what's going on? And the interesting thing is he told me it takes a while for the couple to go, oh, I feel that. Like I can see now because it's an automatic feedback. Like it's this feedback going up, you're dysregulated. That's when he knew it and when they knew it. And so he would stop them and say, what's going on within you? And he said, generally, they both kind of do it at the same time. It's like they've created the pattern together and they cross that point at about the same time. And he can say, okay, let's disengage, work on regulating and come back to the talk. And so that's a real time kind of processing. But when people are aware, and it is interesting to watch how few people are aware of when they are dysregulating. I've had people in my office who are clenched teeth going, I am not angry. And I'm like, your body is telling you differently. So tell me how your body feels. And sometimes just that of like, what is it for you? Is it a tight face, tight neck, tight fists, tight legs, tight back, tight stomach? There's a piece in there that's telling you your body is getting ready for physical combat in an emotional situation. And so we have to kind of break that because that doesn't help. So yeah, teaching regulation is a starting point.
Yeah. You brought up earlier about the physical touch, not necessarily sexual, but physical touch. And it's interesting because I'm somatically trained. So I look for like the temperature shifts in the face and the IAs and the tightness and all this stuff and help people be aware of that. But another thing is like literally, I will watch couples and they don't even know they're doing it, but like stop touching each other. One will literally start moving away.
Turn against.
Oh, or turn away from. I mean, but it's fascinating to watch because like you're watching like the complete unfolding of how they do the thing. They're not even aware that they're doing the thing. Well, they eventually hopefully become aware and they can change that pattern, but it's very somatic. It's not or an emotional thing. It's literally a very physical.
But yeah, you watch the arms crossing,
Yeah.
the moves away. I mean, everything is a self-protection mechanism there and they not recognizing it. And so another piece that I like people to understand is that anger is a secondary emotion. When you are feeling fearful or when you feel like you've been hurt or threatened, you go into, you express anger. That's the outward expression of those because that's meant to repel the danger away. And many times people think they are expressing their hurt and they think they're expressing their threat. They think they're expressing their fear, and all you can see is the anger coming out. And they're not aware of it. And so a part of that is, saying, hey, it feels like you're talking about something that's hurtful, but it sure looks like you're angry. And that just helping them to see and to check it out. Am I right? Is that feeling like there's anger coming at you? And they're like, yeah, that's how it always is. Okay, you're missing the fact. Underlying that, you're missing the fact. So on the other side of the couch, understand that when anger's coming your way, there's a hurt, fear, or threat underneath it that you might want to try to address rather than respond or reacting to the anger. We usually meet anger with anger, but we can choose to respond and ask, what's the threat here? What's the hurt here? Great term. One of my favorite things to talk with people about because they're like, they've lost their sense of empathy with a spouse when they're in the crisis. And curiosity is a way of getting back to empathy. Years ago, when I was teaching graduate students for a therapy program, one of their I was like, oh, so what questions do you have? And they're like, what do you think is the greatest trait to have as a therapist? And I'm like, what do you think I'm going to say? And they named, good listener and all these things. I went, no, curiosity. Because curiosity will lead me to empathy. It will lead me to listening. It will lead me to all these things because now I'm asking the question, wonder why they're acting that way. They're feeling that way. They're thinking that way. I wonder what's behind that. And so when I'm working with couples who have lost that empathy, it's curiosity. You can choose to be curious.
That's wonderful. What question?
I'm happy to keep talking, as you can tell. But so one of the things that I often get asked is, so what can one person do? Where is the starting point?
Perfect.
And so if you find yourself in a crisis, a starting point is to ask those 3 levels of connection we talked about: physical, emotional, spiritual. What could you add back into those? And so let me start with a mistake that people make, and that is they go full bore into it. So, that distance or dynamic that we often see that is described, I call the chaser spacer dynamic. If I'm chasing, you're going to space, and just how we humans do, especially if there's some tension. And so when you chase, all that connection you're trying to throw in at one time, your spouse is going, I don't know what this is, but I don't want to be around it. I'm out of here. And the option is to be a pacer, to figure out how you can add that in and build it up. So if you think about, and I get this question like, okay, so I've got these 3 areas. What specifically do I do? And I'm like, I don't know what it is for you, but I can tell you a little bit more than what you're doing. A little bit more physical connection, a little bit more emotional connection, a little bit more spiritual connection. So physical, there's no connection at all. Being able to pat someone on the shoulder as just passing by and add that back in, or maybe saying, can I give you a hug when they're having a hard time? Doing something that kind of bridges that, because once you're out of the habit of that, then what I often hear from people is, oh, that feels so awkward. So the antidote to awkward is repetitive practice. That's how we deal with any awkwardness. I was talking with a guy, it was just yesterday, I was talking with a couple on the phone, and he was like, it just feels so awkward. And I'm like, so what do you do? Let's say for pickleball, I decided I needed to change my grip on the paddle, and it felt awkward until I kept doing it. And now it's just how I hold the paddle. I just pick it up and it's there. And that's true for all of these areas of connection. It's going to feel awkward for a while because you're out of habit. So yes, awkward, that doesn't mean no, don't do it. It just means you got to work through the awkwardness. So how can you add in some more physical connection? How can you add in some more emotional connection? For instance, one of the things I often see couples falling into is they get into the reporting mode. Like, how was your day? Well, I had a meeting at 10. I had to get a report in at 2. And that's not how their day was. That's a report of what they did, as opposed to rapport, building rapport. That's where connection happens. How was your day? I had a really tough meeting with my boss. Here's why it was so tough. Right. So sharing something, or when somebody said, if you were to say to your spouse, how was your day? And they give you the report, to ask a little deeper. How was that meeting? Right. One layer deeper.
Yeah.
Curiosity. Spiritual connection. Sometimes couples tell me that just feels so awkward because they haven't had any conversation about that for so long. And so I often say, have you watched something on TV that made you think? Like, that was an interesting perspective. Have you watched a movie that made you think? Like, that's an interesting perspective. Because it happens naturally when you're connected. You just might not notice it. My wife and I went and saw Disclosure Day recently. And the whole ride home, we were talking about, what we thought about that from a theological perspective, a philosophical perspective, practical perspective. That's sharing at that level. And so we can use these ways of crossing over. I listened to a podcast the other day that, made me think about this. That's an entry into that often doesn't pull up the resistance, because you're not saying, I need to tell you about my deepest values. That's a big, heavy conversation to start with, but to ease into it. So those 3 areas, a little bit more, often helps them get some traction to build more.
That's great. All right. What is on your cutting edge these days? What do you like diving into? You're like, I really want to learn more about this for the benefit of me being, a great therapist coach.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that one of the things I'm constantly doing is kind of asking the question, what is life teaching me as we go? And that's often been a piece of my. So I had a Thriveology podcast I did for years, and when I was doing jujitsu, I was like, what are the lessons I'm learning from jujitsu, right? And so one began. I think I finally did 3 different podcasts on the lessons I was learning at different stages of jujitsu. Podcast on pickleball. I did. Here's what I'm learning from pickleball as I'm going through different things. So, I mean, here's why do I think curiosity is so important? Probably because I'm a very curious person, and that's a lifelong thing. I mean, my parents did a good job of allowing me to be curious, and so my curiosities around different things mean that I follow lots of rabbit holes. And sometimes I'll be like, okay, that was fun, but and then there are times I go, wait, there's an intersection between this and what I'm doing. And so I'm often writing down, going, I wonder how this fits in. Like, how does this fit human nature? And that's probably cutting edge, meaning that's a lifetime thing of asking, what does this mean for other things?
Love to hear that you're a jujitsu guy too. That's really cool. Love that. So you have a lot of offerings. Where can you walk through some of the things that you do that you can offer? Like, so people are listening to this or reviewing this, or like, I want to learn more about Lee and what he does.
Sure.
Plus, how they can connect with you if they'd like to work with you as well.
Yeah. So all the same kind of stuff. So there are a couple of ways. So I've often used the analogy of being on a boat when you're married. Like you're on the boat and you're trying to figure out how to keep this thing going. And a lot of people just get on the boat and they think they're just headed down the river and everything's good. And so let's use that analogy for a minute. Let's say you're on that boat together and there are kind of 2 places where you might go, I think that might be a waterfall I'm hearing in the distance. We might need to do something about this. And there are 2. And one is it's a distant rumble. Like you're hearing it and you're like, yeah, we're not headed where we want to go. I created an unpause app for people who hit the pause button. And so that is an app. It goes on the phone. So that is an agenda that you can add to your phone. And that's designed to help people get out of the habits of disconnection. It's got trainings in it. It's got a morning exercise, an evening exercise, and some other pieces in there to help them. And it sends a little reminder going, hey, have you done this? So that's the Unpause app, and that's at unpauseyourmarriage.com. So pretty straightforward. Yeah. So unpauseyourmarriage.com is that app. And then for people who realize that they are much closer to the lip than they want to be, and they actually need to take some action to save their marriage, that's savethemarriage.com. That's the Save the Marriage system. And it's been revised and been used around the world. I think we at some point crossed 90,000 people using that program. So it's been popular and been useful for people. And that also has links to my books. It's got links to my podcast and also to me if somebody wants to work directly there. But savethemarriage.com would be there.
Make sure to include that in the show notes. Leah, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm glad you're in the space, saving marriages. That's fantastic. I love your critique of the paradigm that we both grew up in. That's awesome. And, whether it's 50% or whatever the percentages of divorces, I'm glad there are people on the front lines, such as yourself, that are helping to save marriages. Whether it's just people recognizing there's a little bit of a challenge and they want to preempt it before it becomes something big, or as you shared, like people are close to getting divorced and you help them as well. So keep up the great work.
Well, thanks. Always nice to have a partner in crime doing the same kind of stuff.
Take care, buddy.
Thank you.